At my birthday party, my wife and kids presented me with divorce papers and eviction notices. We're selling the house, the company, and you get nothing. My son spat. Happy birthday, loser. They all laughed. I simply took a pen and signed. Fine, I said. I packed my life and vanished. A week later, I received 737 missed calls because it happened sooner. You know what they say about 55? Hell, I don't know what they say either, but I figured it couldn't be worse than 54, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Like, catastrophically, life-alteringly, soul-crushingly wrong. But let me back up before I start sounding like some bitter old guy ranting at clouds. Though after today, I'm pretty much qualified for that gig too. The morning started normal enough. Well, as normal as birthdays get when you're staring down the barrel of senior citizen discounts and wondering when the hell middle-aged became a polite lie. I rolled out of bed at 6 sharp, same as always, because apparently my internal clock didn't get the memo that it was supposed to be my special day. Clara was already up, bustling around the kitchen with that purposeful energy she gets when she's planning something. Good sign, I thought. Maybe she remembered this year. Morning, birthday boy, she called out without turning around, which should have been red flag number 1. Clara always looked at me when she talked. Always. 27 years of marriage, and the woman had never been able to multitask a conversation. But hey, coffee was brewing, and optimism runs strong when you're caffeinated and naive. I grabbed my usual mug, the one Lucas made me in 4th grade pottery class that looks like a deformed kidney but holds exactly the right amount of coffee, and settled in for what I hoped would be a quiet morning. Maybe some eggs, definitely some bacon, possibly even one of those fancy pastries from the bakery downtown that Clara pretends are too expensive but always manages to justify on special occasions. So, I said, testing the waters, any big plans for today? She glanced over her shoulder with this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Red flag number 2, but who's counting? Oh, you'll see. I think you're going to be very surprised. Surprised. Right. In my experience, surprises at 55 fall into 2 categories: medical procedures and family interventions. Neither one typically involves balloons and cake, but stranger things have happened. I spent the day at the shop, putting the finishing touches on a cherry wood dining set for the Hendersons. Nothing like honest work to clear your head and make you feel useful. Plus, sawdust has this way of making everything else seem simple by comparison. Wood doesn't lie. Wood doesn't scheme. Wood just is what it is, which is more than I can say for most people these days. The afternoon dragged like a Monday in February, but I kept my spirits up thinking about whatever Clara had planned. Maybe dinner at Romano's, that little Italian place where we had our first date back when the world was young and I still had hair that didn't require strategic combing. Maybe a quiet evening with the kids, assuming they could tear themselves away from their busy lives long enough to acknowledge their old man's existence. I should have known better. I really should have known better. I pulled into the driveway around 6, noting the unusual number of cars parked along our street. The Johnsons from next door, the Millers from across the way, even old Mrs. Patterson, who usually only emerges for apocalyptic weather events. Either someone had died, or Clara had gone completely overboard with whatever she'd planned. Given my luck, it was probably both. The backyard was lit up like a carnival. String lights hanging from the oak tree I'd planted when Lucas was born, tables covered with my grandmother's good tablecloths, and what looked like half the neighborhood milling around with drinks in their hands. My first thought was pride. Clara had really outdone herself this time. My second thought was confusion, because since when did we have this many friends? My third thought was pure, unadulterated dread, because everyone was looking at me with expressions that ranged from pity to barely concealed amusement. Surprise, they all shouted, but it came out wrong somehow. Like actors who'd rehearsed the wrong play. Clara emerged from the crowd carrying a chocolate cake with 55 candles blazing like a small inferno. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that. Same blonde hair she'd worn since college. Same green eyes that had talked me into buying this house in the first place. Same smile that had convinced me she was the one 27 years ago. But something was off. Something in the way she held herself, the way she looked through me instead of at me. Lucas and Maya flanked her like bodyguards, which was weird because since when did my kids coordinate anything together? Lucas, 28, and already showing signs of premature balding that he'd inherited from my side of the family, wore his lawyer face, the one he used in court when he was about to destroy someone's life for sport. Maya, my baby girl at 24, looked like she was about to throw up or cry or possibly both. "Make a wish, honey," Clara said, and her voice had this strange, hollow quality that made my skin crawl. I looked around at all these faces, neighbors I'd helped with home repairs, friends I'd known for decades, people who'd eaten at my table and borrowed my tools and shared backyard barbecues with me every summer for years. They were all avoiding eye contact now, studying their shoes or the grass or anything that wasn't me standing there like an idiot with a cake full of fire in front of me. "Before you blow out the candles," Clara continued, and now I knew something was seriously wrong because her voice was shaking. "We have something for you." Lucas stepped forward with this thick manila envelope, and the smirk on his face was pure predator. I'd seen that look before, back when he was 12 and had just figured out how to lie to me about breaking windows with his baseball. Only now he was an adult, and the stakes were considerably higher than a broken pane of glass. "Go ahead, Dad," he said, practically purring with satisfaction. "Open it." My hands were steady as I tore open the envelope. Funny how calm you can feel when your world's about to implode. Inside were official-looking documents, all legal letterhead and fancy fonts, and my name printed in stark black ink. Divorce papers, eviction notice, transfer of business ownership. The words swam in front of my eyes for a moment before snapping into sharp, cruel focus. "We're selling the house," Lucas announced to the suddenly silent crowd, his voice carrying across the backyard like he was delivering a eulogy. "The company too. And Dad here gets exactly what he deserves, nothing." The laugh that bubbled up from my chest surprised everyone, including me. It wasn't bitter or angry or even particularly sad. It was just empty, like the sound air makes when it escapes from a punctured tire. Maya stepped forward then, her voice shaking but determined. "Happy birthday, loser." And then they all laughed. Every single one of them. Clara's champagne giggle, Lucas's barking guffaw, even Maya's nervous twitter. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some of them backing toward the gate like they wanted to escape, but couldn't figure out how to leave without seeming rude. My oldest friend Daniel Grant took a half step forward like he wanted to say something, anything, but then froze when Clara shot him a look that could have melted steel. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, holding these papers that officially ended my life as I knew it. 55 years old, and I was being voted off the island by my own family. On my birthday. With cake. The thing that gets me is how calm I felt. Like I was watching it all happen to someone else. Some poor bastard in a movie who'd trusted the wrong people and was about to learn a very expensive lesson about loyalty and blood and the difference between the two. I pulled a pen from my shirt pocket, same blue Bic I'd been carrying for 15 years, and signed every page without reading them. What was the point? The fix was in, the verdict delivered, the sentence passed. All that was left was the execution. "Fine," I said, handing the papers back to Lucas, who was practically vibrating with triumph. "Congratulations. You win." I walked inside, packed 2 suitcases with everything that mattered, which, it turned out, wasn't much, and left my own life behind. Just like that. No scene, no drama, no desperate pleas or threats or promises to fight back. Because sometimes, when you're completely and utterly screwed, the only thing left to do is walk away with whatever dignity you can scrape together, and figure out how to make them all pay for it later. The Moonlight Motel looked like the kind of place where dreams went to die a slow, painful death. Peeling wallpaper with a pattern that might have been flowers or dead insects. Honestly, at this point, what's the difference? The air conditioner wheezed like a chain smoker on his deathbed, and the carpet had stains that told stories I didn't want to hear. But hey, it was $49 a night, and when your life's been torched faster than a marshmallow at a bonfire, you don't get to be picky about accommodations. I sat on the edge of what I generously called a bed, staring at my phone like it held the secrets of the universe. Instead, it held 27 years of lies disguised as family photos. There's Clara at our wedding, radiant in white, promising to love, honor, and apparently fleece me blind. Lucas taking his first steps, Maya losing her first tooth, Christmas mornings and birthday parties and vacations to places I worked overtime to afford. All of it fake. All of it bullshit wrapped up in pretty paper and tied with a bow. The rage hit me somewhere around photo number 47, Maya's college graduation, where she'd hugged me and said I was the best dad in the world. Right. Best dad. Best sucker, more like it. I must have been paying for her acting lessons without realizing it. By morning, I'd made a decision that would have sounded insane 12 hours earlier, but now felt like the sanest thing I'd done in years. Time to disappear. Not just leave town. Any idiot can do that. I'm talking full-scale vanishing act, like I never existed in the first place. Let them try to find someone who doesn't want to be found. First stop, U-Store, the graveyard of abandoned dreams and seasonal decorations. I rented a 10 by 12 unit and moved my tools into storage. My table saw, my router, my collection of hand planes that had belonged to my grandfather. The only inheritance I'd ever received that was worth a damn. These weren't just tools. They were extensions of my hands, my identity, my soul. But right now, they were also evidence of who I used to be, and that guy was officially dead. The storage unit smelled like dust and broken promises, but it felt safer than anywhere I'd been in years. I ran my hand over my grandfather's workbench one last time, promising it, and him, that this wasn't goodbye forever, just a tactical retreat while I figured out how to rebuild from the ashes of my former life. Next stop, First National Bank, where I'd been quietly squirreling away money for 15 years without telling Clara. Call it paranoia, call it wisdom, call it the best damn decision I ever made. 40,000 in cash, all legitimate, all mine, all untraceable once I walked out that door. The teller looked at me funny when I asked for it all in hundreds, but I just smiled and told her I was buying a boat. People always understood boat purchases, even when they made no sense. The Chevy Silverado was sitting on Jerry's used car lot like it was waiting for me specifically. 7 years old, one previous owner who'd apparently treated it like his firstborn child, and most importantly, no computer systems that could track my every move. I paid Jerry in cash, signed the title as John Harrison instead of Harrison Briner, and drove off the lot feeling like I'd just shed my skin. West. That was my only plan. Drive west until the Pacific Ocean told me to stop, then figure out what came next. No GPS, no credit cards, no electronic breadcrumbs for anyone to follow. Just me, the road, and whatever passed for country music on AM radio these days. 2 days of driving through America's heartland will teach you things about yourself you never wanted to know. Like how comfortable you can get with gas station coffee that tastes like battery acid. Or how many ways there are to prepare beef jerky, most of them wrong. Or how quiet your brain gets when there's nobody left to disappoint you. I stopped at a roadside bar somewhere in Colorado, the kind of place where the beer's cold, the conversation's minimal, and nobody asks questions they don't want answered. That's where I met Sophie Callahan, and let me tell you, that woman was like finding water in the desert when you didn't even know you were thirsty. She was sitting alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey and editing photos on a laptop that had seen better decades. Travel photographer, she told me when I asked what brought her to this particular slice of nowhere. She had tired eyes, but a steady voice, the kind that comes from seeing enough of the world to know that everyone's carrying damage they don't talk about. You look like someone who's running from something, she said after we'd shared a drink and some comfortable silence. Is it that obvious? I asked. Takes one to know one. She showed me a photo on her laptop. A small town nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountains that looked like they were protecting it from the outside world. Place called Riverbend, about 6 hours north of here. Small but alive, you know? The kind of town where people mind their own business but help when you need it. Good place for someone to start over. You sound like you know from experience. I spent 3 months there last year. Met a lot of people who'd come there to disappear and ended up finding themselves instead. She finished her whiskey and closed the laptop. Town could use a good craftsman if you're interested in honest work. 2 days later, I was driving down Main Street in Riverbend, Colorado, population 3,847 according to the welcome sign. Sophie hadn't been lying. The place felt alive in a way my old neighborhood never had. Kids riding bikes without helmets, old-timers playing chess in the park, small businesses that actually seemed to be thriving instead of just hanging on by their fingernails. I rented a cabin on the outskirts of town from a widow named Mrs. Chun who asked exactly 3 questions. Could I pay first month's rent in advance? Did I have any pets? And was I running from the law? When I answered yes, no, and not exactly, she handed me the keys and told me the coffee shop opened at 6 if I was an early riser. The cabin was perfect, small enough that I couldn't lose myself in it, big enough that I didn't feel trapped. 1 bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen that had seen better decades, and a living room with windows that looked out on mountains that made my problems seem microscopic. More importantly, it had a garage where I could set up a basic workshop once I figured out how to get my tools back. I started small, repairing furniture for neighbors who'd heard through the grapevine that there was a new guy in town who knew his way around wood. A wobbly kitchen table here, a broken chair there, a cabinet door that had been hanging crooked since the Clinton administration. Word spread the way it does in small towns, through a network of gossip and good intentions that somehow always knows exactly what you need to hear. Meanwhile, my phone rang constantly. Friends from my old life, confused and concerned, leaving messages that started sympathetic and gradually turned irritated when I didn't call back. "Harrison, what the hell is going on?" from Daniel. "Dad, people are asking questions from Maya. Even a few business contacts wondering where I'd disappeared to." Clara, bless her black little heart, had apparently told everyone I'd had a breakdown. Poor Harrison, cracked under the pressure of turning 55 and realizing his best years were behind him. Such a shame, really, but these things happen to men his age. They'd all nod knowingly and make mental notes to be extra nice to their own husbands, just in case. My kids? Radio silence. Not a single call, not a single text, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook message, which told me everything I needed to know about how deep this betrayal really went. They weren't worried about their dear old dad. They were probably celebrating their newfound freedom from the old man who'd been holding them back all these years. Fine by me. Let them think I'd lost my mind. Let them think I was wandering around somewhere, broken and defeated, maybe sleeping under bridges and muttering to myself about the good old days. The truth was so much better and so much worse for them in the long run. Because while they were busy dividing up my life, like vultures picking over roadkill, I was learning how to be someone new. Someone who didn't give a damn about their opinion or their approval or their pathetic attempts to justify what they'd done. Someone who was about to become their worst nightmare. 3 months in Riverbend, and I'd managed to do something I hadn't done in years, sleep through the night without wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. Turns out, when your family isn't actively plotting your destruction, life gets surprisingly peaceful. Who knew? I'd hung a simple wooden sign outside my cabin, Harrison Woodworks. No flashy graphics, no business license bullshit, just honest lettering carved into a piece of local pine. Word had spread through town the way good news does in small places, quietly but thoroughly. Mrs. Patterson needed her kitchen cabinets refurbished, the Hendersons wanted a custom dining table, and old Joe Martinez brought me a rocking chair that had belonged to his grandmother and needed more love than surgery. Each piece I fixed, each joint I strengthened, felt like putting myself back together one splinter at a time. There's something zen about working with your hands when your heart's been put through a wood chipper. The tools don't judge you, the wood doesn't lie to you, and at the end of the day, you've got something solid to show for your efforts. Unlike, say, 27 years of marriage. That's when Victor Blackwood walked into my life like he'd been sent by Central Casting for wealthy guy who changes everything. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance before buying groceries. "You're the craftsman everyone's talking about," he said, running his hand along a coffee table I'd just finished for the local doctor. "Impressive work. Depends on what you need," I replied, because in my experience, guys like Victor don't show up at backwoods workshops to chat about the weather. I'm developing a luxury resort in Aspen, 15 custom guest suites, each one unique, each one requiring furniture that money can't buy off any showroom floor. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos that made my jaw drop. We're talking presidential suite-level luxury here, the kind of place where movie stars go to pretend they're normal people for a week. I need a craftsman who understands that rich people don't just want expensive, they want exclusive. Something their equally rich friends can't get anywhere else. He quoted a number that made my knees wobble. 6 figures. For 3 months of work. "When do you need an answer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't. I can see it in your eyes. You're already designing the pieces in your head." He was right, damn him. Contract's in my car. Read it, sign it, and let's make some art together. The contract was everything he'd promised and more. 50% up front, the rest on completion, plus materials budget that would let me work with what I'd only dreamed about. Brazilian rosewood, American black walnut, figured maple that looked like it had been painted by angels. This wasn't just a job, it was a ticket back to the big leagues. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a hell of a view of how far you've fallen. And more importantly, it shows you exactly who pushed you off the cliff. That night, I called Daniel Grant, my oldest friend, the guy who'd stood frozen at my birthday party while my family performed open-heart surgery on my life without anesthesia. If anyone would give me the straight dope about what was happening back home, it'd be him. Jesus Christ, Harrison, where the hell have you been? He exploded before I could even say hello. Clara's been telling everyone you had some kind of nervous breakdown. The kids are acting like you're dead, and your business. What about my business? Silence. The kind of silence that costs money and breaks hearts. Daniel, what about my business? She brought in some hotshot from Chicago. Guy named Adrian Cole. Real smooth talker, fancy suits, big promises about modernizing everything. His voice got quiet. Harry, they erased you. Like you never existed. Your name's off the building, off the letterhead, off everything. And this Cole character, he's living in your house. There it was. The confirmation of what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. Clara hadn't just thrown me away, she'd replaced me. Probably had him picked out before she served me those divorce papers. Hell, for all I knew, they'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Tell me about Adrian Cole, I said, grabbing a pen and paper. Real piece of work. 2 failed marriages. Left a trail of debt from here to California. And according to my sources, he's got a talent for taking over healthy companies and running them into the ground. Daniel paused. Harry, I think Clara's in over her head. This guy's got debts you wouldn't believe, and word is he's already started borrowing against the business assets. The pieces started falling into place like dominoes in my head. Clara wasn't some evil mastermind who'd orchestrated this whole thing. She was a mark, a lonely, aging woman who'd fallen for a professional con man who specialized in wealthy widows and recently divorced women. Adrian had probably spotted her vulnerability from a mile away, moved in like a shark smelling blood in the water. But here's where it got really interesting. If Adrian was everything Daniel said he was, then my former life was about to implode all by itself. Clara, Lucas, and Maya had thought they were inheriting a gold mine. Instead, they'd handed it over to a guy who turned everything he touched into fool's gold. I pulled up Adrian Cole on my laptop, and what I found was better than Christmas morning. This guy was a walking disaster with a LinkedIn profile. Company after company, all of them thriving when he arrived, all of them bankrupt within 2 years of his departure. He was like the grim reaper of small businesses, and my family had just invited him to move into the master bedroom. That night, I started making lists. Names, dates, connections, debts, opportunities. This wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. Though don't get me wrong, that was still high on my priority list. This was about justice. Clara and the kids had betrayed me, but they were about to get played by someone who made me look like a saint. I found a photo online from some Chicago society event. Clara and Adrian at a gallery opening, his hand resting on her back, right where mine used to belong. She was smiling that same radiant smile she'd worn at our wedding, the one that had convinced me she was the love of my life. Only now it looked different. Desperate. Like she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else that she'd made the right choice. Looking at that photo, I felt something I hadn't expected, pity. Not for what I was about to do to them, but for what they'd already done to themselves. They'd traded a builder for a destroyer, a provider for a parasite, security for the illusion of excitement. The Victor Blackwood contract was just the beginning. I was about to build something bigger than furniture, bigger than a business, bigger than the life they'd stolen from me. I was going to build their destruction, one careful piece at a time. And the beautiful thing? They were going to help me do it. Because apparently, when it comes to making spectacularly bad decisions, my family had more talent than I'd ever given them credit for. Time to put that talent to good use. The Aspen Project was like getting paid to work out at the world's most expensive gym. 6 weeks of crafting furniture for people who had more money than sense, and my bank account was looking healthier than it had in years. But more importantly, I was building something else alongside those custom pieces, a network of connections that would make my old Rotary Club look like a kindergarten playgroup. Victor's friends were the kind of people who owned things. Not just houses or cars, but companies, politicians, and occasionally small countries. They dropped by the workshop to see what the talented craftsman was building for Victor's resort, and somehow those conversations always drifted toward business opportunities. Funny how that works when you're holding a piece of their buddy's investment in your hands. That's how I met Gregory Hayes, a venture capitalist who collected distressed companies like some people collect stamps. Tall, lean, with the kind of sharp eyes that could spot weakness from 3 counties away. He admired the dining table I was building for Victor's presidential suite, running his fingers along the hand-cut dovetails like he was reading Braille. "Beautiful work," he said. "You know, I've been hearing interesting things about a furniture company back east. Brine or something." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was grinning like a wolf. "Can't say I know it. Apparently it's going through some management changes. New leadership, new vision, all that corporate bullshit." He paused, watching my reaction. Word is the transition isn't going smoothly. Quality issues, customer complaints, financial irregularities. Shame, really. Used to be a solid operation. We talked for an hour over coffee that probably cost more per cup than most people make in a day. I painted a picture of a once great company being run into the ground by inexperienced management and poor leadership, which, let's be honest, wasn't exactly fiction at this point. "Hypothetically speaking," Gregory said as he was leaving, "if someone wanted to acquire the debt associated with such a company, how would they go about it?" "Hypothetically? I'd start with the suppliers and subcontractors. Small companies like that usually owe money all over town. Buy up enough of their debt, and you've got leverage." I handed him my business card, the one that said Harrison Woodworks, not Harrison Briner. Of course, you'd want someone who really understood the industry to advise you. Within 2 weeks, Gregory's firm had quietly started acquiring contracts and debts linked to my former company. Nothing flashy, nothing that would raise red flags, just the kind of behind-the-scenes financial maneuvering that happens every day in corporate America. The beautiful thing about capitalism is that it doesn't care about your feelings, only your credit rating. Meanwhile, Daniel was feeding me intelligence reports that read like a comedy of errors written by people who'd never heard of competence. Lucas had fired the compliance officer to save money, apparently not understanding that OSHA regulations aren't optional suggestions. Maya had started cutting corners on materials, using cheaper wood and passing it off as premium quality. And Adrian was doing what Adrian did best, charming clients while systematically looting everything that wasn't nailed down. "It's like watching a slow-motion car crash," Daniel told me during one of our weekly calls. "Clara keeps asking me if I've heard from you, and honestly, I think she's starting to panic. The business is hemorrhaging money. Customers are complaining, and Adrian's spending like there's no tomorrow." That's when I decided it was time to bring in some professional help. I'd heard about Miller through Victor's network, ex-military, specialized in corporate investigations, and had a reputation for finding things people didn't want found. The kind of guy who could make Jimmy Hoffa give up his hiding spot if you paid him enough. Miller looked exactly like what you'd expect from an ex-Special Forces investigator. Compact, efficient, and about as chatty as a sphinx with laryngitis. But he got results. Within 3 days, he had a complete dossier on Adrian Cole that read like a masterclass in how not to live your life. "Your boy's been busy," Miller said, sliding a manila folder across the table at our meeting in Denver. 2 ex-wives, both claiming he cleaned out their accounts before disappearing. A string of failed businesses from Chicago to Miami. And get this, he's got gambling debts with some very unsavory characters in Atlantic City. But the real gold was in the photos. Adrian with a young brunette who definitely wasn't Clara, checking into a 5-star hotel in Chicago. The same brunette at Adrian's apartment, wearing nothing but one of his shirts. And my personal favorite, Adrian and his mystery woman laughing over champagne while reviewing bank statements that had Clara's name on them. "Who's the girl?" I asked. "Rebecca Hartwell, 28, trust fund baby from Connecticut. Parents died in a plane crash 2 years ago, left her about $15 million. She's been through 3 financial advisors in the past year, each one mysteriously disappearing after her portfolio takes a hit." Miller's smile was colder than a Wisconsin winter. "Seems like Adrian's got a type. Lonely women with more money than sense." Perfect. Adrian wasn't just robbing Clara blind. He was already lining up his next mark. The guy was like a financial serial killer, moving from victim to victim, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts in his wake. I spent that evening crafting what I like to think of as my masterpiece, an anonymous package containing everything Miller had found, plus a few additional touches I'd gathered myself. Photos of Adrian with Rebecca, copies of financial documents showing suspicious transfers, even a timeline showing how his previous relationships had ended. All of it professionally packaged and delivered to 3 addresses: Clara's house, Lucas's apartment, and Maya's new place downtown. Then I sat back and waited for the fireworks to begin. I didn't have to wait long. Daniel called me the next morning, practically vibrating with excitement. "Holy shit, Harry. I don't know who your guardian angel is, but Clara got a package yesterday that's got her ready to murder someone. She showed up at the office this morning looking like she'd seen a ghost, and she's been on the phone with lawyers all day." "Any word from the kids?" "Maya called me crying about 2 hours ago. Apparently, she got the same package." "And Lucas?" Daniel chuckled. "Lucas is threatening to sue everyone from the mailman to the FBI. But here's the funny part. Nobody's blaming you. They all think it came from one of Adrian's previous victims. Beautiful. Let them think Adrian's past had finally caught up with him. Let them realize that the golden boy they'd traded me for was nothing but fool's gold wrapped in an expensive suit. Let them understand that they'd thrown away 27 years of stability for a con man who'd been playing them from day one." The house went up for sale within a week, but here's where Gregory's quiet maneuvering started paying dividends. Every potential buyer somehow discovered issues with the property at the last minute. Foundation problems, zoning concerns, mysterious liens that appeared and disappeared like financial ghosts. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, just the kind of bad luck that happens when the wrong people develop an interest in your real estate transactions. Meanwhile, I was building something beautiful in Aspen. Furniture that would last generations, crafted with the kind of attention to detail that money can't buy but talent can create. Each piece was signed Harrison Woodworks, and wealthy clients were starting to ask if I could make custom pieces for their own homes. Life was good. Life was getting better. And back home, life was about to get very, very complicated for the people who'd thought they were so clever on my 55th birthday. Sometimes revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, it's even better when you let your enemies cook it themselves. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, turns out the same thing applies to the worst-laid plans of ex-wives and their shiny new boy toys. Sometimes karma doesn't need a push. It just needs someone to point it in the right direction and get out of the way. The OSHA inspection was a thing of beauty. I'd made the anonymous tip 3 weeks earlier, just a concerned citizen reporting potential safety violations at a local furniture manufacturer. Nothing vindictive, nothing personal, just a helpful heads up that maybe someone should take a look at how Briner Furniture was handling workplace safety these days. Daniel filled me in on the gory details during our usual Thursday evening call, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. "Harry, it was like watching a nature documentary about corporate extinction." The inspectors walked in at 9 a.m. sharp, clipboards in hand, looking for violations. They didn't have to look hard. He paused for dramatic effect. "Turns out when you fire your compliance officer to save money, you also lose the guy who knows which regulations keep you from getting buried under federal fines." The list was impressive in its sheer incompetence. Improper ventilation in the finishing room, safety equipment that hadn't been inspected since the Bush administration, the first one, and my personal favorite, a blocked emergency exit that Lucas had turned into storage space for his golf clubs. Because nothing says safety first, like making sure you can't escape a fire, but you've got easy access to your 9-iron. "How much?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I was going to enjoy the answer. $47,000 in fines. Plus, they shut down production until everything's brought up to code, which the inspector estimated would cost another 30 grand. Clara was screaming at Lucas. Lucas was screaming at the foreman and Adrian. Daniel chuckled. Adrian was mysteriously absent. Apparently, he had urgent business in Chicago. I'll bet he did. Probably making sure Rebecca Hartwell's trust fund was still accessible while his current con job imploded around his ears. The man had timing, I'll give him that. But here's the thing about dominoes. Once you tip the first one, the rest fall pretty much on their own schedule. That night, I sat down with my laptop and a bottle of bourbon that Victor had given me after seeing the dining set I'd finished for his resort. Top-shelf stuff. The kind of liquor that makes you philosophical about justice and the nature of revenge. I'd been saving the best stuff for last. The financial records Miller had acquired through channels I didn't ask about, and he didn't volunteer. Bank statements, credit reports, loan applications, the whole paper trail of a family business being systematically looted by someone who probably thought fiduciary responsibility was a type of insurance. The dossier I put together that night was a masterpiece of documentation. Photos of Adrian with Rebecca, bank records showing suspicious transfers, credit applications where he'd lied about his employment history, even a psychological profile that Miller had somehow obtained from one of Adrian's ex-wife's divorce proceedings. The man was a textbook narcissist with sociopathic tendencies and a shopping addiction that would make a Kardashian blush. This time, I didn't send anonymous packages. This time, I used a courier service with a return receipt because I wanted to make sure my little care packages reached their intended recipients personally. Clara got hers at the office. Lucas got his at his law firm, signed for by his secretary in front of 3 partners. And Maya? Maya got hers delivered to the apartment she'd been forced to move into after the house went on the market and mysteriously failed to sell. The reaction was swift and nuclear. Clara called an emergency family meeting for that same evening, which Daniel heard about through his network of gossips and bitter ex-employees. According to his sources, it started as a strategy session and ended as a cage match. Apparently, Clara came out swinging, Daniel reported the next morning. She confronted Adrian about the photos, the money transfers, the whole 9 yards. He tried to charm his way out of it at first, then shifted to righteous indignation, then finally went with outright denial. Classic narcissist playbook. And the kids. That's where it gets interesting. Lucas is furious, but not at Adrian, at whoever's been harassing the family with these fabricated documents. He's threatening to sue for invasion of privacy, defamation, the whole legal shotgun approach. Daniel paused. But Maya? Maya's asking questions. Hard questions. About where the money's been going, why the business is failing, who Adrian really is. The first crack in the foundation. Maya had always been the smart one, the one who inherited my attention to detail along with my grandmother's green eyes. If anyone was going to see through Adrian's bullshit, it would be her. Gregory Hayes called me that afternoon with an update on the financial side of things. His firm had quietly acquired enough of Briner Furniture's debt to have significant leverage, and the OSHA fines had pushed the company closer to insolvency than Clara probably realized. Your former wife is drowning, he said with the kind of clinical detachment that made him very good at his job. The business is hemorrhaging cash, the house still hasn't sold, and now she's got federal fines on top of everything else. I'd say she's got maybe 6 weeks before she has to start making some very unpleasant choices. What kind of choices? The kind where she has to decide which debts to pay and which creditors to stiff, which, coincidentally, puts her in violation of several loan covenants. His smile was audible through the phone. Funny how these things work out. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since leaving. I called Maya directly. Not from my regular phone, of course. I'd picked up a burner in Denver specifically for communications I didn't want traced back to Harrison Woodworks. The number showed up as unknown caller on her phone, which probably made her think twice before answering. Hello. Her voice was cautious, tired. Hello, Maya. Dead silence. Then, in a whisper, Dad, you got the package. Where are you? Everyone's been. Mom said you had a breakdown. That you were. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. The question is, are you? I could hear her crying, soft little sobs that reminded me of when she was 7 and had scraped her knee falling off her bike. Back when I was the one who kissed the hurt away and made everything better. Dad, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I didn't know about Adrian, about what he was doing. Mom was just so angry after you left, and he seemed so charming, so helpful. Maya, listen to me very carefully. You have one chance here. One opportunity to pick a side before this whole thing collapses. Because it is going to collapse. Adrian's going to disappear with whatever money he can grab. Your mother's going to be left holding the bag, and Lucas is going to be too busy protecting his own ass to help anyone else. What do you want me to do? I want you to be smart. I want you to remember that you're my daughter, not just Clara's. And I want you to think very carefully about whether the people who convinced you to betray me are the same people you want standing beside you when everything falls apart. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, if I helped you, if I gave you information about what's really happening with the business, would you? Would you forgive me? Forgiveness is earned, Maya. But I've never stopped loving you, even after what you did. The question is whether you love yourself enough to do the right thing now. 2 weeks later, an encrypted email appeared in my inbox. Financial records, internal memos, documentation of Adrian's spending, even recordings Maya had made of conversations between Clara and Adrian about hiding assets. Everything I needed to complete the picture of a company being systematically destroyed from within. The first domino had fallen. My daughter had chosen her side. And for the first time since that hellish birthday party, I felt something that might have been hope. Desperation has a smell, and apparently it smells like expensive perfume mixed with cheap fear. Clara walked into Gregory Hayes' downtown office wearing her best power suit and the kind of forced smile that screams, "Please don't notice I'm drowning." I wasn't there, of course. That would have ruined the surprise. But Gregory's assistant recorded everything for what she called compliance purposes. Amazing how many things become legal when you frame them as business documentation. According to Gregory's gleeful recap over dinner that evening, Clara had walked in thinking she was meeting with a potential white knight, some venture capitalist who'd heard about her temporary difficulties and might be interested in providing bridge financing to help her through this rough patch. She had no idea she was walking into a spider's web that I'd been weaving for months. She actually brought a business plan, Gregory told me, dabbing his mouth with a napkin that probably cost more than most people's grocery bills. 47 pages of pure fiction about how the company was just experiencing growing pains under new management. No mention of the OSHA fines, the customer complaints, or the fact that Adrian had already transferred half their liquid assets to accounts she couldn't access. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Gregory let her pitch, asked thoughtful questions, and even complimented her on her ambitious vision for modernization. Then he offered to buy the company for 30 cents on the dollar, with the generous stipulation that all existing debts would be assumed by the new ownership group. She went pale when I explained that we'd already acquired most of her outstanding obligations. Gregory continued. Turns out when you're hemorrhaging money and your credit rating's in the toilet, your creditors are more than happy to sell your debt to investment firms at a significant discount. Basic business, really. Clara had demanded time to consider the offer, which Gregory graciously granted. 72 hours to decide between financial ruin and total humiliation. Like asking someone if they'd prefer to be shot or hanged. Either way, the outcome's the same, but at least you get to feel like you have a choice. Meanwhile, back in Riverbend, I was building something that actually mattered. Legacy Woodworks had grown from a one-man operation working out of a garage to a legitimate business with 5 young apprentices who showed up every morning eager to learn real craftsmanship. Tully was a kid from Denver whose parents had given up on him after he dropped out of college 3 times. Amara had grown up in foster care and never thought she'd amount to anything until she discovered she had a gift for intricate carving. Joey, Sarah, and Miguel were all local kids who'd been heading toward dead-end jobs until they found out they could make a living creating beautiful things with their hands. "You know what I love about this?" Tully asked one afternoon as he put the finishing touches on a jewelry box he'd been working on for 3 weeks. "Nobody can take this away from you. Once you know how to do this, really know it, you're never helpless again." Smart kid. He understood something that Clara and Lucas had never figured out, that real security comes from competence, not connections. You can lose your job, your house, your family, but if you can create something valuable with your own 2 hands, you'll never truly be broke. The shop was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. We had a waiting list that stretched 6 months, clients driving from as far as California to commission pieces, and a reputation that was spreading through the kind of wealthy circles where word of mouth is worth more than advertising. But the real satisfaction came from watching these kids discover what they were capable of when someone believed in them. Through Gregory and Reed. Another venture capitalist who'd become interested in the Briner situation after hearing about it at their country club, I'd arranged what they politely called a structured acquisition plan. In plain English, that meant they were going to buy Clara's company, strip out all the toxic assets Adrian had created, rebuild it from the ground up, and eventually hand control back to someone who actually knew what they were doing. Someone who understood the business, the industry, and the value of treating employees like human beings instead of disposable assets. Guess who that someone was going to be? Maya's intelligence reports had been invaluable in planning the timing. Lucas was spending more time at the office trying to micromanage operations he didn't understand, which was like watching a toddler perform brain surgery. Clara was having daily screaming matches with Adrian, who'd apparently decided that the best defense was a good offense, and was now claiming that all their problems stemmed from sabotage by disgruntled former employees. If only he knew how right he was. Adrian tried to make one last play for respectability, which was like watching a con man audition for sainthood. According to Maya's latest report, he'd proposed that they could solve all their problems by selling the business assets to his associates in Chicago, a plan that would have left Clara with nothing but debt and Adrian with a convenient excuse to disappear to parts unknown. That's when Miller made his second appearance in this little drama. I'd kept him on retainer after our initial success, partly for his investigative skills, but mostly because Adrian had the kind of criminal mind that requires professional supervision. Miller's network included people who specialized in making sure certain individuals didn't slip through legal cracks when justice came calling. Adrian tried to run when he realized the walls were closing in, packed a bag, cleaned out what was left of the accessible accounts, and headed for the airport with tickets to Montreal under an assumed name. He made it as far as the departure gate before Miller's associates introduced him to the concept of civilian arrest. Turns out he had outstanding warrants in 3 states, Miller reported with obvious satisfaction. Amazing what a thorough background check can uncover when you know where to look. He'll be fighting extradition for months, and that's assuming he doesn't get shanked by someone who lost money in one of his previous scams. Clara's meeting with Gregory Hayes lasted 15 minutes the second time around. No presentation, no negotiation, no desperate attempts to salvage dignity from disaster. Just a pen, some papers, and the kind of signature that officially ends one chapter of your life while opening another. She walked out of that office with enough money to start over somewhere else, assuming she was smart enough to learn from her mistakes. Lucas kept his law license but lost his inheritance. Maya moved into a small apartment in downtown Denver and started designing custom pieces under license from Legacy Woodworks, blending her artistic vision with the craftsmanship I'd taught her. And me? I went back to Riverbend with the satisfaction of a job well done and a future that belonged entirely to me. No partners to betray me, no family to disappoint me, no expectations except the ones I set for myself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so much better than what they stole that their theft becomes irrelevant. But I wasn't quite finished yet. 14 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days after my own family threw me a surprise birthday party that ended with my exile, I walked back into the boardroom where it all began. Only this time, I wasn't the guy getting screwed. I was the guy holding the screwdriver. The conference room looked exactly the same, down to the coffee stains on the mahogany table I'd built with my own hands 20 years ago. Same leather chairs, same view of the parking lot where I used to arrive every morning at 7 sharp, same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying of liver disease. But everything else had changed, starting with the fact that I now owned 67% of the company formerly known as Briner Furniture. The board meeting was supposed to start at 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:30, partly for dramatic effect, but mostly because old habits die hard. Gregory Hayes was already there, looking like the cat who'd eaten the canary and then bought the pet store. The other investors filed in over the next few minutes. Serious men in expensive suits who'd put their money behind my resurrection because they believed in one simple principle. Competence beats chaos every time. Clara walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, probably thinking she was fashionably punctual. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone had let the air out of her and she hadn't quite figured out how to reinflate. Her hair was still perfectly styled, her makeup still flawless, but there was something brittle about her now, like a piece of antique china that's been glued back together too many times. She took her seat at the far end of the table, ironic, considering this used to be my chair, and kept her eyes fixed on the agenda in front of her. Lucas had managed to worm his way into the meeting as family legal counsel, which was like bringing a kazoo to a symphony orchestra, but hey, everyone deserves a front row seat to their own professional execution. Maya wasn't there. Smart girl. She'd already chosen her side and was busy building her own future instead of trying to salvage the wreckage of everyone else's mistakes. I let Gregory handle the preliminaries, quarterly reports, financial statements, the kind of corporate housekeeping that makes everyone's eyes glaze over. But I was watching Clara the whole time, studying her reactions, waiting for the moment when she realized exactly what was happening. That moment came when Gregory announced that the board had voted unanimously to approve a complete restructuring of the company's leadership, effective immediately. New CEO, new management team, new vision for the future. All very professional, very corporate, very final. Any questions about the transition plan? Gregory asked, looking around the table with the kind of bland smile that probably gave Clara nightmares. Who's the new CEO? She asked, her voice steady but strained. Excellent question. Gregory turned toward me with theatrical precision. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Harrison Briner, returning to lead the company he founded 27 years ago. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a mouse sneeze in the next county. Clara's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, rage, fear, and finally something that might have been recognition. Like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Hello, Clara, I said, standing up and straightening my tie. Miss me? Lucas shot to his feet like someone had stuck a cattle prod up his ass. This is impossible. He signed away all rights to the company. I witnessed it myself. He has no legal standing to. To what? I interrupted, pulling out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. To acquire controlling interest through legitimate business transactions? To buy debt from creditors who were tired of waiting for payment? To invest in a distressed company that was being run into the ground by incompetent management? I spread the documents across the table like I was dealing cards. Purchase agreements, debt assignments, stock transfers, all of it legal, all of it documented, all of it adding up to the simple fact that I now owned what they'd thought they'd stolen from me. You see, Lucas, while you were busy playing lawyer and Clara was busy playing house with her new boyfriend, I was busy playing the long game. Turns out, when you're good at what you do and you understand how business actually works, rebuilding from nothing isn't as hard as you might think. Clara finally found her voice. How long? She whispered. How long have you been planning this? Since about 30 seconds after you handed me those divorce papers at my own birthday party, I said, sitting back down and folding my hands on the table. Did you really think I was going to disappear quietly into the night? Did you honestly believe that after 27 years of building this company, I'd just walk away and let you and your con artist boyfriend run it into the ground? Adrian wasn't. Adrian was exactly what I said he was. A parasite who specialized in finding vulnerable women and bleeding them dry. The only surprise is how completely he played you. I almost felt sorry for you. Almost. Gregory cleared his throat diplomatically. If we could return to the business at hand? Mr. Briner, perhaps you'd like to outline your plans for the company moving forward? I stood up again, walked to the whiteboard, and began sketching the organizational chart I'd been refining for months. First, we're bringing in a completely new management team. People who actually understand furniture manufacturing and aren't related to me by blood or marriage. Second, we're rebuilding our reputation by going back to the quality standards that made this company successful in the first place. And third, we're expanding into custom work and artisan pieces, because that's where the real money is. I turned back to the table. We're also relocating the main workshop to Colorado, where we've already established Legacy Woodworks as a subsidiary. Better access to materials, lower overhead, and a workforce that actually gives a damn about what they're building. You can't just move the company, Lucas protested. There are contracts, obligations, employees, all of which will be honored. The employees who want to relocate will get generous moving packages. Those who don't will get excellent severance and references. As for contracts, we'll honor every legitimate agreement we inherited. The questionable ones, the ones Adrian negotiated while looting the company, those are a different story. Clara hadn't said a word during my presentation. She just sat there staring at me like I was a ghost who'd walked through the wall and announced he was taking back his haunted house. Why? She finally asked. Why didn't you just destroy us completely? You could have. You had the power to make sure we all ended up with nothing. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I'd married all those years ago. The young teacher who'd believed in me when I was nothing but a carpenter with big dreams. The mother who'd stayed up all night with sick children. The partner who'd helped me build something worth building. Because building is harder than destroying. I said. And because despite everything you did to me, I'm not like you. I don't throw away decades of work just because I'm angry or hurt or looking for something new and exciting. The meeting ended with handshakes and legal documents and the kind of polite corporate pleasantries that mask the fact that you've just witnessed someone's professional funeral. Clara left without saying goodbye, Lucas trailing behind her like a lost puppy who'd suddenly realized his favorite toy had been taken away. That evening, I met Maya at a small diner outside town. She looked good, healthier than she had in months, more confident, like someone who'd finally figured out which direction was up. "So," she said, stirring cream into her coffee, "I hear congratulations are in order. Depends on your perspective. From where I'm sitting, I just got my life back. From your mother's perspective, I probably look like the villain in a Shakespearean tragedy. Mom made her choices. We all did." Maya's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I'm just glad I figured out which side I wanted to be on before it was too late." I reached across the table and handed her a business card. "Maya Briner, lead designer, Legacy Woodworks. Your office is ready whenever you are. No strings attached, no family politics, just good work for people who appreciate quality." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before that disastrous birthday party. "Think we can make this work? Father and daughter in business together. I think we can make anything work if we're honest with each other and remember that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and showing up when it matters." As for Lucas, well, Lucas had made his choice too. He'd chosen to spit in my face and laugh while signing my exile papers. Blood doesn't erase betrayal, and I wasn't in the forgiveness business anymore. He could keep his law license and his entitled attitude and figure out how to build his own life without the inheritance he'd thought was guaranteed. That night, Daniel called with news that Adrian had slipped bail somehow and disappeared into the wind. The ghost was back, but he was someone else's problem now. I'd built what I came to build, taken back what was mine, and created something better than what I'd lost. Now it was time to focus on the future instead of the past. The first call came at 2:47 a.m., jolting me out of the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Nothing good ever happens at 2:47 a.m. unless you're a vampire or an emergency room doctor, and I was pretty sure I wasn't either of those things. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the caller ID that showed Clara's number. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out over common sense. "Do you know what time it is?" I answered, not bothering to hide my irritation. The voice that came through the speaker wasn't Clara's calm, controlled tone. This was raw, ragged, desperate. Like someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point and was free-falling into panic. "He broke into my condo," she sobbed, the words tumbling over each other like rocks in an avalanche. "Adrian. He was waiting for me when I got home from dinner. The locks, the security system, none of it mattered. He was sitting in my living room like he owned the place." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. This wasn't the Clara who'd orchestrated my betrayal, who'd stood there laughing while our children drove knives into my back. This was a terrified woman who'd finally realized that the monster she'd invited into her bed had turned on her. "Are you hurt?" I asked, because despite everything that had happened between us, I wasn't a complete bastard. "No, not physically. But Harrison, he took everything. My jewelry, the cash I kept in the safe, even my grandmother's silver tea set. And then her voice broke completely. "He left a message on my bathroom mirror, in red paint. It said, 'Your husband ruined me. Now he'll pay.'" My blood went cold. Adrian wasn't just running scared. He was coming for me. And apparently, he was stupid enough to think that threatening Clara would somehow hurt me more than what she'd already done to herself. "Where are you now?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "I'm at Maya's apartment." I didn't know where else to go. The admission came out like a confession, like she was acknowledging that her support network had shrunk to exactly one person who might still care enough to help her. "Stay there. Don't go anywhere. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't recognize, and call the police. File a report. Get everything documented." "The police?" She laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That my ex-boyfriend, who's already wanted in 3 states, broke into my house and stole my stuff? They'll put it on a list with 10,000 other cases they'll never solve." She wasn't wrong, but paperwork creates paper trails, and paper trails sometimes lead to justice. Or at least they give you something to point to when you're explaining to a jury why you had to take matters into your own hands. The second call came an hour later. Maya, crying so hard I could barely understand her. Dad, someone broke into my apartment. They trashed everything. My drawings, my portfolio, my computer, everything's destroyed. And there's writing on my mirror too. It says, "Ask your father what happens to traitors." That's when I stopped feeling sorry for Adrian and started feeling sorry for Adrian. Because the son of a bitch had just made the biggest mistake of his miserable life. You can threaten me all you want. I've been threatened by bigger men than Adrian Cole and lived to tell about it. But you threaten my daughter, you cross a line that even someone like me has limits about. I called Miller before the sun came up. Emergency rates didn't bother me anymore. I had money now, real money, and some things are worth paying premium prices for. "We've got a problem," I told him when he answered on the first ring, because Miller was the kind of professional who never really slept. "Adrian Cole? How'd you know?" "Because men like him always escalate when they're cornered. It's in their nature. They can't just take their losses and disappear quietly. They have to burn everything down on their way out." I could hear him moving around, probably getting dressed and armed and ready to do whatever needed doing. "Where are the women now?" "Maya's apartment, but I'm moving them somewhere safer. Clara's scared out of her mind, and Maya's apartment got hit too." "Smart. I know a place by the lake, privately owned, good security, off the grid. I'll have my people sweep it first, make sure it's clean." Within 6 hours, I had Clara and Maya installed in a safe house that looked like a millionaire's fishing lodge, but was actually a fortress disguised as a vacation home. Miller's team had checked every corner, installed additional security cameras, and positioned armed guards who looked like landscapers but carried enough firepower to stop a small army. Clara had barely spoken during the ride, just sat in the passenger seat of my truck staring out the window like she was seeing the world for the first time. Maya rode in the back, clutching a bag of salvage belongings and jumping every time a car door slammed in the distance. "This is temporary," I told them as we settled into the main room, which featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lake that reflected the mountains like a mirror. "Just until we can deal with Adrian permanently." "Deal with him how?" Clara asked, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not fear. She was past fear now. This was something harder, more focused, like a woman who'd finally realized that being a victim was a choice, and she was choosing something else. "Leave that to me," I said. "Right now, your job is to stay alive and let Miller's people do what they do best." What Miller's people did best, it turned out, was find people who didn't want to be found. Adrian had holed up in a cabin about 40 miles outside the city, apparently thinking that hiding in the woods would make him invisible to the kind of professionals who'd spent years hunting actual terrorists in places where satellite surveillance was the least of your worries. I drove out there alone, against Miller's strong recommendation and my own better judgment. But this was personal now, and some conversations need to happen face-to-face, man-to-man, without intermediaries or lawyers or anyone else to muddy the waters. The cabin was exactly what you'd expect from a desperate man on the run. Isolated, run down, and probably rented with cash from someone who didn't ask questions. Adrian's BMW was parked out front like a neon sign advertising his location to anyone with half a brain and an internet connection. I knocked on the door like a civilized person, because even when you're confronting a sociopathic con artist who's threatened your family, manners matter. "Adrian, it's Harrison. I think we need to talk." The door opened slowly, revealing a man who'd aged about 10 years in the past month. Adrian's trademark charm was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd finally run out of marks to con and lies to tell. He was holding a gun, but his hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure he could hit a barn from inside the barn. "You," he snarled, like my very existence was a personal insult to his sense of how the universe should work. "This is all your fault. I had everything under control until you came back from whatever hole you'd crawled into." "You had nothing under control," I said, stepping into the cabin uninvited. "You were a small-time grifter who got lucky enough to find a lonely woman with money and stupid enough to think it would last forever." The cabin was a disaster. Empty bottles, takeout containers, the detritus of a man who'd given up on basic human hygiene along with everything else. Adrian backed up as I entered, keeping the gun pointed in my general direction, but clearly having no idea what to do with it. I offered you 2 doors back when you still had choices, I continued, looking around the mess he'd made of his hideout. Door number 1 was cooperation. Admit what you'd done, return what you'd stolen, serve some soft time in a minimum security facility where the worst thing that would happen to you is bad cafeteria food. Door number 2 was keep running and see where it got you. I'm not going to prison, he said, and his voice had that high, tight quality that meant he was about 5 seconds away from a complete breakdown. No, I agreed. You're not. Because you picked door number 3, which wasn't one of the options I offered you. What's door number 3? I smiled at him, the kind of smile that probably would have made him wet himself if he'd had any liquid left in his system. Door number 3 is threatening my family. And that door leads somewhere very different than the other 2. Miller's team moved in at sunset, because dramatic timing is important in situations like this. They didn't kick down the door or throw flashbang grenades. They just appeared, like smoke made solid. And suddenly Adrian was on the ground with zip ties around his wrists and a very professional-looking tranquilizer dart in his neck. Clean and quiet, Miller reported as they loaded the unconscious con artist into an unmarked van. He'll wake up in federal custody with enough charges to keep him busy until he's old enough to collect Social Security. Assuming he lives that long, which is questionable given his talent for making enemies. I watched the van disappear into the gathering darkness, carrying Adrian Cole toward whatever justice looked like for men who preyed on vulnerable women and threatened innocent people. I should have felt satisfaction or vindication, or at least relief that the threat was neutralized. Instead, I felt tired. Bone deep, soul-weary tired, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there until someone finally took it off my shoulders. By morning, Adrian was in a federal holding facility facing charges that included extortion, fraud, interstate flight to avoid prosecution, and a handful of other felonies that carried sentences measured in decades rather than years. The guards at his new home were considerably less charming than the staff at the luxury hotels he was used to, and his cellmate was a gentleman named Tiny who'd apparently taken a personal interest in men who hurt women. Clara and Maya came back to town that afternoon, accompanied by Miller's security team and carrying themselves like soldiers returning from a war they'd actually won. Clara looked different, harder, more focused, like someone who'd been tested and discovered she was stronger than she'd thought. What happens now? Maya asked as we stood in the parking lot of the police station where they'd just finished giving their statements. Now you rebuild, I said. Both of you. Clara goes back to teaching or finds something else that makes her happy. You finish your apprenticeship and start building furniture that'll outlast all of us. And I go back to Riverbend and pretend this whole nightmare never happened. Clara caught my arm as I turned to leave. Harrison, I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but you're right, I interrupted. It doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. I looked at the woman I'd once loved enough to build a life with, the mother of my children, the person who'd shared my dreams until she decided to burn them down for the sake of someone who'd turned out to be a mirage. The thing is, Clara, I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while, furious, actually. But anger's exhausting, and I've got better things to do with my energy than waste it on people who don't deserve it. So we're done? Just like that. We've been done since my 55th birthday. This was just cleanup. I drove back to Riverbend that night, through mountains that looked like sleeping giants under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow I'd go back to my workshop, back to creating things that would last longer than the people who'd commissioned them. I'd teach my apprentices, build furniture for people who appreciated quality, and live the kind of quiet, honest life that Adrian Cole had never understood was possible. And if I was very lucky, I'd never see any of them again. A year later, I was standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, watching the sun paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and crimson that no artist has ever quite managed to capture on canvas. The coffee was perfect, a dark roast from a local place that knew how to treat beans with respect, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I had absolutely nothing to complain about. My house was everything the old one had pretended to be. Every piece of wood had been chosen personally, every joint cut by my own hands, every detail crafted with the kind of attention that comes from building something you actually plan to keep. The kitchen cabinets were made from reclaimed barn wood that had aged for over a century before I gave it new life. The dining table was a piece of walnut so beautiful it made visitors stop talking when they saw it. Hell, even the coat rack by the front door was a work of art that museums would have fought over. But the real masterpiece was visible through the kitchen window. Legacy Woodworks had grown from a 5-person operation into something that looked like a small village dedicated to the ancient art of making things that last. 3 workshops now, each one specializing in different aspects of the craft. The main building housed the apprentice program, where we'd expanded from 5 kids to 30 young craftsmen who showed up every morning eager to learn something their smartphones couldn't teach them. The second workshop was Maya's domain, a design studio where she created custom pieces that blended traditional techniques with contemporary aesthetics. Her work was getting written up in magazines I'd never heard of, selling to clients who understood that true luxury isn't about brand names or price tags. It's about owning something that exists nowhere else in the world. The third building was my personal workshop, where I took on the kinds of commissions that most furniture makers would consider impossible. A dining set for a tech billionaire who wanted something that would last 500 years. A jewelry box with hidden compartments so intricate it took me 3 months just to design the locking mechanism. A rocking chair for a grandmother who'd survived the Holocaust and wanted something beautiful to pass down to her great-grandchildren. We had waiting lists that stretched 18 months, clients flying in from Japan and Germany just to see their pieces being built, and a reputation that had spread through the kind of circles where money wasn't the limiting factor, time and talent were. "Morning, boss," Tully called out as he headed into the main workshop, lunchbox in one hand and coffee mug in the other. The kid had grown up a lot in the past year, developed the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're good at something that matters. His work was getting so refined that I'd started letting him handle some of the solo commissions. Amara waved from across the yard, where she was unlocking the design studio. She discovered a talent for carving that bordered on supernatural. Give her a piece of cherry wood and a set of chisels, and she could make it look like fabric blowing in the wind. Maya had taken her under her wing, teaching her the business side, while learning new techniques from someone who saw patterns in wood grain that most people couldn't imagine. The other apprentices filtered in over the next hour, each one carrying themselves with the kind of pride that comes from creating something valuable instead of just processing information or pushing paper around. These kids understood something that most of their generation had forgotten, that there's a satisfaction in building something with your hands that no amount of digital achievement can match. Maya's car pulled into the gravel parking area just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. She'd moved to Riverbend 6 months ago, renting a small house on the other side of town and diving into the work like someone who'd finally found her calling. Watching her transform from the angry young woman who'd helped orchestrate my birthday ambush into a confident artisan had been like watching a butterfly emerge from a cocoon made of family dysfunction. "Dad," she called out, jogging over with the kind of energy that suggested either excellent news or terrible coffee. "I just got off the phone with that collector in Switzerland. He wants to commission an entire bedroom suite. Hand-carved headboard, matching nightstands, an armoire that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. And he's willing to pay." She paused for dramatic effect. "$250,000 for one bedroom set." I whistled low and long. Swiss money spends just as well as American money. "What's the timeline?" 8 months. And he wants to fly us out there when it's finished, see it installed in person." She grinned like a kid who'd just been told Christmas was coming twice this year. First-class tickets, 5-star hotel, the whole fairy tale. This was the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. Not just the business success, though that was satisfying in its own way. It was the relationships. Working alongside my daughter as an equal, watching young people discover their potential, creating things that would outlast all of us and bring beauty into the world long after we were gone. Meanwhile, the wreckage of my former life had settled into patterns that would have been tragic if they weren't so predictable. Lucas had managed to keep his law license, but barely. The Bar Association had investigated his role in the business irregularities, and while they couldn't prove criminal intent, they'd made it clear that his career trajectory now pointed firmly downward. Last I'd heard, he was selling real estate in Florida, probably convincing retirees to buy swampland and calling it waterfront property. The golden boy who'd once thought he was entitled to inherit my life's work was now hustling for commission checks and learning what the rest of us had always known. That success has to be earned, not inherited. Clara had surprised everyone, including herself. After a few months of what Daniel diplomatically called intensive therapy, she'd taken a teaching position at a small college in Arizona. Art history, with a focus on craftsman movement furniture. Apparently, being conned by a professional had given her new insights into the difference between authentic value and flashy marketing. Her students loved her, according to Maya, who still talked to her mother occasionally. Not enough to rebuild their relationship, but enough to know that Clara was slowly figuring out how to live with the consequences of her choices. And Adrian? Adrian was discovering that federal prison was a very different environment from the luxury hotels and country clubs where he'd practiced his trade. Word had filtered back through Miller's network that Adrian had tried to run the same con games on his fellow inmates that had worked so well on wealthy women. Turns out, career criminals have considerably less patience for bullshit than lonely divorcees. His last known address was the prison infirmary, where he was recovering from what the medical report diplomatically described as injuries sustained during a recreational activity. I felt no satisfaction from his suffering, but I felt no sympathy either. Actions have consequences, and Adrian had spent his adult life avoiding consequences through charm and manipulation. Prison was just the universe's way of balancing the books. But the real victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in what I'd built to replace what they'd destroyed. Legacy Woodworks employed 43 people now, from apprentices to master craftsmen to administrative staff, who handled the business side, while the rest of us focused on creating. Everyone made a living wage. Everyone had health insurance, and everyone understood that they were part of something bigger than just a job. Sophie Callahan had become a regular visitor to Riverbend, documenting the workshop for a photography book about American craftsmen. What had started as a professional project had evolved into something more personal. She'd rented a cabin near mine and spent her non-traveling time helping with the business side of Legacy Woodworks. "You know what I love about this place?" she said one evening as we sat on my porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Everyone here is building something. Not just furniture, lives, careers, futures. You can feel it in the air." She wasn't wrong. There was an energy in Riverbend that I'd never felt in my old life, a sense that everyone was moving in the same direction, supporting each other's success instead of competing for scraps. Maybe it was the mountain air, or maybe it was just what happened when you assembled a group of people who understood that real satisfaction comes from creating something valuable instead of just accumulating stuff. That night, as I walked through the workshops one last time before heading home, I ran my hand along the edge of a dining table Amara was building for a family in Vermont. The wood was smooth as silk, the joints so precise they looked like they'd grown that way naturally. In 20 years, that table would still be beautiful. In 50 years, it would be an heirloom. In 100 years, it might end up in a museum as an example of early 21st century American craftsmanship. This was why I'd rebuilt my life from nothing. Not for revenge, though that had been satisfying in its own way. Not for money, though financial security was nice. I'd done it because some things are worth preserving, worth teaching, worth passing down to the next generation. My family had thought they were destroying me when they threw me away like a broken tool. Instead, they'd freed me to become something better than what I'd been before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And I'd gotten so much better that the old life looked like a rough draft compared to the finished product. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, when the aspen leaves were putting on their annual Golden Light show, and the air had that crisp bite that reminded you winter wasn't just a rumor. My lawyer's voice carried the kind of carefully neutral tone that meant either very good news or very bad news, and at this point in my life, I was prepared for either. "Harrison, I've got the final paperwork on the Millbrook property. Clara signed off on everything yesterday. As of this morning, you're officially free and clear of any remaining legal entanglements from your previous marriage." The Millbrook property, a small cabin on 20 acres that Clara and I had bought during our 5th year of marriage, back when we still believed we were building something that would last forever. We'd planned to retire there someday, maybe build a workshop where I could make furniture just for the joy of it, without worrying about deadlines or client demands. Funny how plans work out sometimes. She say anything when she signed? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared about Clara's mental state anymore. Actually, yes. She asked me to tell you that she hopes you're happy. Said she'd seen some photos of your new place in a magazine article about American craftsmen and that it looked like everything you'd ever wanted to build. I hung up the phone and walked outside, breathing in mountain air that tasted like freedom and possibility. The ledger was closed. Every debt paid, every obligation settled, every legal thread connecting me to my former life finally cut. I was officially, completely, irrevocably free to be whoever the hell I wanted to be. Which, it turned out, was exactly who I'd become. The morning passed like most mornings in Riverbend, productive, peaceful, and utterly lacking in the kind of manufactured drama that had poisoned my old life. I spent 2 hours working on a jewelry box commissioned by a tech executive who wanted something worthy of his wife's collection of vintage brooches. The wood was Madagascar ebony, so dark it seemed to absorb light, so dense it rang like a bell when you tapped it. Working with material like this was like having a conversation with something that had been growing before Columbus was born. Maya stopped by around lunchtime, carrying sandwiches from the deli downtown and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she had news to share. "Guess what arrived this morning?" she said, pulling an envelope from her bag with the dramatic flair of a magician revealing the ace of spades. Inside was a check from the Swiss collector, final payment for the bedroom suite we'd finished the month before. The amount was large enough to fund the expansion we'd been planning, with enough left over to give everyone in the shop a bonus that would make their Christmas shopping considerably more enjoyable. He also sent photos of it installed in his home. Maya continued, spreading glossy prints across my workbench. "Look at this." The bedroom looked like something from a fairy tale written by someone who understood that real magic comes from human hands guided by knowledge passed down through generations. Our headboard rose toward the ceiling like a carved forest, with details so intricate you could study them for hours and still discover new elements. The matching pieces flowed together like they'd grown from the same tree, which in a sense they had. I'd selected every board personally, matching grain patterns and color variations until the whole suite looked like nature's own design. "We're good at this," Maya said, and there was wonder in her voice, like she still couldn't quite believe that creating beautiful things could be a legitimate way to make a living. "Yes," I agreed. "We are." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Daniel to catch up on the gossip from my old life. Not because I missed it, but because sometimes you need to check the weather in places you've left behind, just to remind yourself why you don't live there anymore. "Harry, was just thinking about you. Did you see the article in Forbes about artisan furniture makers? They had a whole section about legacy woodworks. Made it sound like you're single-handedly reviving American craftsmanship. Hardly single-handed. I've got 43 people helping me revive American craftsmanship." I settled into my favorite chair. A piece I'd built for myself from cherry wood that had been aging in my workshop for 2 years, waiting for the right project. "How's everyone else doing?" "Clara's doing well, from what I hear. Teaching suits her." "Lucas." Daniel paused in that way that meant the news wasn't good, but wasn't catastrophic either. "Lucas is Lucas. Still blaming everyone else for his problems. Still convinced the world owes him something special just for existing. He called me last month, drunk and bitter, asking if I thought you'd ever forgive the family for what happened." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that forgiveness implies someone's asking for it, and as far as I know, he's never actually apologized for anything. Just complained about the consequences of his choices." That evening, Sophie and I sat on my front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sun disappear behind mountains that made every sunset look like a painting. She'd finished her photography book about American craftsmen, and the publisher was predicting it would be one of those coffee table books that actually got read instead of just displayed. "I've been thinking," she said, swirling wine in her glass and looking thoughtful, "about what you said the other night, about building something that lasts longer than the people who make it. What about it? Most people spend their lives creating things that disappear. Emails, presentations, quarterly reports, digital files that'll be obsolete in 5 years. But you've built something real. Something that'll still be here when your great-grandchildren are old." She wasn't wrong. Every piece of furniture that left Legacy Woodworks carried a guarantee, not just against defects, but against planned obsolescence, against the disposable mentality that treated everything as temporarily useful rather than permanently valuable. When someone bought one of our dining tables, they were buying something their descendants would inherit, not something they'd replace when the style changed. "You know what the best part is?" I said, reaching over to take her hand. I'm not angry anymore. For the longest time, I thought I was building all this to prove something to the people who'd betrayed me. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about them and started being about this. About creating something worth creating, with people worth working with, in a place worth living. So if Clara or Lucas or even Maya asked for forgiveness tomorrow, you'd give it to them? I thought about that for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. Forgiveness was a complicated thing, not a switch you could flip, but a process that happened gradually, like wood aging or mountains wearing down. Maya, I already have forgiven, because she earned it. She chose to change, to build something better than what she'd been part of before. I paused, considering the others. Clara? I don't know. Maybe someday, if she keeps growing in the direction she's heading. But Lucas? I shook my head. Some betrayals cut too deep, Sophie. Some wounds don't heal, they just stop bleeding. Lucas looked me in the eye and laughed while he destroyed everything I'd built. That's not something you get over. That's something you get past. And you have? Gotten past it. I looked around at everything I'd built. The workshops, the house, the life, the relationships that actually meant something. The peace that came from going to bed each night knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up and create something valuable instead of just managing something broken. Yeah, I said, I finally have everything I need, and nothing I don't. And for the first time since that nightmare birthday party, that was actually true.